Hello. These are true horror stories from people who actually lived them. Abandoned houses, strange sounds, moments you'll never forget. Brave enough? Subscribe, hit the bell, and let's begin. When Michael and Emily Turner first arrived in Chicago in 1993, the city felt overwhelmingly alive. Cars rushed through the streets like restless waves. The L train screeched above their heads, and the people seemed to move with a rhythm they hadn't yet learned. Everything felt new, hopeful, and intimidating all at once. What they didn't know was that in a quiet corner of Brighton Park, an apartment waited for them. An apartment that had watched many come and go, and never let any of them leave unchanged. That the Baxter Building didn't look special. A simple red brick structure with faded numbers, nailed to the entrance, and a stairwell that echoed even the lightest footsteps. Yet the building seemed to hold its breath in a strange, unnatural silence, especially at night. Tenants rarely interacted. Doors closed quickly. Windows were almost always shut regardless of the weather. But the cheapest place in the city was apartment 3A. When Michael first climbed the narrow staircase to the third floor, he felt something odd, like the air thickened slightly around him. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and something he couldn't identify. Something metallic. Apartment 3A stood at the very end of the hall. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and the odd feeling disappeared immediately. The afternoon sun poured into the living room through two wide windows, warming the floorboards. It looked almost cozy. Almost. Henry Baxter appeared behind him, walking slowly into the doorway as if the walls resisted him. His heavy boots echoed across the wooden floor. He handed Michael the keys without much expression. There was something unreadable in his eyes, concern, or warning, or maybe resignation. "If you need help with anything," Henry said, "you can find me on the first floor. And try to keep the noise down at night." Michael nodded. He thought it was a strange request for a nearly empty building, but he didn't question it. The following week, they moved in. The first days passed without incident. Emily loved the way the hallway light filtered into the bedroom in the mornings. Michael liked how quiet the building was compared to their previous apartment. But little things began happening almost immediately. The first was the strange coldness around the closet in the bedroom. No matter how high they turned the heater, that corner remained cold, the kind of cold that seeped into the bones. Then one night, around 3 a.m., they heard it. A single footstep. Just one. Heavy. Slow. It came from the hallway outside their door. Michael quietly approached, looked through the peephole, and saw nothing, only the dim hallway lit by the flickering yellow bulb overhead. But as he walked back to the bed, a second footstep echoed. This time from inside the apartment. He froze. Every hair on his arm stood up. He whispered to Emily, who was half asleep, that it was probably just plumbing or the building settling. But the truth was, he didn't believe that. Something about the sound had weight. Intent. By the end of the first month, cracks began to show not only in the apartment, but in their nerves. Emily grew uncomfortable being alone there. Whenever she returned from work, she felt watched, as if someone stood just out of sight. She tried to shake it off as exhaustion, but the tension grew heavier every day. Then came the night. She saw the first real sign that something was terribly wrong. She had just stepped out of the shower. The mirror had fogged up naturally from the steam. She wiped a circle clear with her hand, leaned closer to adjust her hair, and then stepped away to grab a towel. When she returned, a long, jagged line had formed across the mirror, almost like the glass had been scratched by fingernails. But it wasn't the line that terrified her. It was the message carved just beneath it. "See you." Her scream brought Michael running. He stared at the mirror, speechless, then said, "Emily, this is impossible. The glass isn't even broken. It's just fog." But it wasn't fog. The letters were etched. She could feel the grooves with her fingers. The next day, Michael talked to Henry Baxter. The building owner sighed, rubbed his eyes, and simply said, "Old building. Pipes. Strange drafts. Some tenants get nervous. It'll pass." It didn't. The footsteps began occurring every night. Same time, same number, same slow, dragging weight. Michael started waking up drenched in sweat, convinced someone had stood at the foot of the bed during the night. Emily had dreams, dark, choking dreams where someone whispered her name. Always the same voice. Always the same tone. Angry. Possessive. The tension grew so intense that they stopped talking about it altogether. Talking made it real. And one night, at 3:17 a.m., the footsteps didn't stop at the ceiling. They traveled down the walls. Slow. Deliberate thuds that moved down toward their bedroom door. Michael sat up in bed, trembling, staring at the door as the sound crept downward, and then stopped right outside. For a full minute, nothing happened. Then came the knock. 3 slow, heavy knocks. He didn't open the door. They barely slept until morning. A week later, they found the writing on the bedroom wall. The dark, dried red letters. The message so blunt, so hateful, so filled with intent that Emily nearly fainted. "This place will never be yours." Michael decided to confront Henry again. But as he walked down the stairs, he ran into Mrs. Holloway, the elderly tenant from the second floor. She stared at him with wide eyes. Eyes that seemed to know exactly what he was going through. "You're in 3A, she whispered. "Aren't you?" He nodded. She clasped his wrist suddenly, tightly. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You need to leave," she said. "That thing, that shadow, it doesn't want you there. It doesn't want anyone." "What shadow?" Michael whispered. But the old woman shook her head and shut her door. The next night, their entire world unraveled. Emily was in the living room, exhausted from work. The TV flickered occasionally, but she ignored it. Michael was in the bathroom, fixing a loose outlet. Suddenly, the lights cut out. The darkness in the apartment felt unnatural thick. Suffocating, alive. Emily called out to him, but only silence answered. Then she heard it. "Hello," whispered. Not from Michael, not from anywhere in the room. From inside the bathroom. Voice so distorted it barely sounded human. A whisper layered with several tones, like multiple people speaking at once. It murmured Michael's name over and over. Emily's knees felt weak as she approached the bathroom door. The whispering stopped the moment her fingers touched the handle. She opened the door. Michael stood frozen in front of the mirror, pale as death. His eyes were locked on the reflection. Emily followed his gaze and saw the shadow. A tall, faceless figure stood directly behind Michael in the mirror, towering over him, its head bent slightly to the side like a predator observing prey. But in the room itself, there was nothing. Emily screamed. Michael stumbled backward. The light flickered violently and then came back on. The shadow vanished. They planned to leave the next morning, but the apartment did not want them to leave at 2 a.m. They woke to the sound of the closet door creaking open by itself. Then the bathroom door. Then the kitchen cabinets. Every door in the apartment opened and closed violently, as if the place was breathing. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. A cold wind rushed down the hallway, and then the lights exploded in a shower of sparks. That was when they saw it. The shadow was standing at the end of the hallway. Not in a reflection, not in their imagination. It was there, solid, dark, towering, its body shifting like smoke, but its posture unmistakably human. It began moving toward them. Fast, not slow. Just steady. Emily couldn't breathe. Michael grabbed her, pulled her through the door, and they ran. As they fled down the stairs, they heard the apartment door slam behind them with such force The sound echoed through the entire building, and just before they reached the exit, the whisper came again clearer than ever. "Don't come back." Emily collapsed into hysterics. She was taken to the hospital with acute shock. Michael sat beside her, staring blankly at the wall. Quietly, almost ashamed, he admitted something to the nurse. "I saw him before. In the mirror. I thought I imagined it. I thought if I ignored it, it would go away." They left Chicago a week later and never returned. Apartment 3A still sits at the end of that dim hallway. The rent remains low. New tenants try to move in every few months. None last long. They all report the same things. Footsteps above the ceiling. Knocks behind the walls. Whispers from the bathroom in a tall, faceless shadow watching them sleep. Some say it's Charles, Avery. Others say it's something older. But everyone agrees on one thing. Whatever lives in apartment 3A isn't human. He had chosen the house because it was far away from everyone. That was the whole point. After years of feeling drained by noise, crowds, and the constant pressure of city life, he wanted silence so complete that he could hear his own thoughts again. And the house offered exactly that. A lonely, weather-beaten structure sitting deep in a forgotten stretch of countryside, surrounded by endless fields and a forest that grew so thick it swallowed entire patches of sunlight. For the first few weeks, the isolation felt like medicine. He woke up to the sound of wind instead of traffic, brewed his coffee while looking out over rolling hills instead of apartment blocks, and fell asleep each night to a darkness so pure that it felt like a soft blanket being pulled over the world. But the thing about silence is, it can hide things. It began one night near the end of the first month. He had gone to bed early. The weather was cold, and the wind was strong enough to rattle the thin wooden boards of the house. He lay under his blanket, listening to the wind scrape against the shutters like long fingernails across old wood. He drifted somewhere between sleep and wakefulness, and that's when he heard it. A single, unmistakable sound. A footstep not outside inside the house. He froze, eyes open in the dark, every hair on his body rising one by one. He stayed completely still, listening again. For a long moment, there was nothing but the restless wind. Maybe it had been the house settling, he told himself. Old houses made old noises. He finally forced his eyes closed and slept. But the next night, it happened again. This time the sound came from the hallway, soft, slow, deliberate steps passing the door of his bedroom. He held his breath, convincing himself that it had to be his imagination. The mind could play tricks, especially when surrounded by so much silence. But the third night removed all doubt. He was in the living room, late in the evening. Rain hammered against the windows, and flashes of lightning revealed the landscape in cold white bursts. He turned off the lamp, planning to head to bed early, when something creaked in the far corner of the room. He immediately froze. Another creak, louder. Then something shifted, a sound like fabric brushing over wood. He stood absolutely still, barely breathing, eyes locked on the dark corner of the room. The lightning flashed again. For the tiniest split second, he thought he saw a shape, the outline of something tall, standing perfectly still. His stomach dropped. The lamp flickered and went out completely. The house returned to total darkness. He backed away slowly, his heartbeat pounding loud enough to drown out the storm. He reached for his phone, turned on the flashlight, and swept it across the room. The corner was empty. But the air felt different, heavier, colder. As if something unseen had just moved past him. He didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard faint, distant noises from the kitchen, from the stairs, from places he wasn't even sure anyone could stand. Soft thuds, light scraping. whisper-like movements that didn't belong to wind or wood. By morning, he hadn't had a second of rest. He walked through every room of the house with the daylight behind him, trying to find an explanation. A loose window frame, a raccoon, anything. But nothing was out of place. He tried to convince himself the isolation was playing tricks on him. People weren't meant to be completely alone. Maybe he was hearing echoes, distortions, or sounds from the storm bouncing through the old walls. That night, he locked every door and window before bed. He left the light on in the hallway, and he kept his phone in his hand until sleep finally pulled him under. At 3:17 a.m., he shot awake. The light in the hallway was off. He knew for a fact he hadn't turned it off. He always slept with it on, since the noises started. Then came the sound. Not footsteps this time, not breathing. Right outside his bedroom door. Deep, slow, wet, like something trying to pull air through a throat that hadn't been used in a long time. He sat up in bed, trembling uncontrollably. The breathing grew louder. Then the doorknob moved, not violently, not rattling. It turned slowly, as though someone or something on the other side was testing it, tasting the idea of opening the door. He didn't think. He acted. He grabbed his phone, jumped out of bed, and sprinted to the window. He threw it open despite the freezing wind and climbed out, scraping his arm on the edge of the frame. He didn't look back. Not even once. He ran through the dark yard barefoot, the grass wet and cold beneath his feet. He didn't stop running until he reached the dirt road, until the house was nothing but a black outline behind him. He kept going and going. By the time he reached the nearest village, the sun was beginning to rise. He told the locals he had heard someone break into his home. They offered to check the property with him after sunrise, but he refused. He never went back to that house. He didn't want to know what had been breathing behind that door. He didn't want to see what shape had been standing in the corner of his living room. And when he finally moved to a small apartment in the city weeks later, with neighbors above, below, and beside him, he realized something. Silence was never the problem. It was what the silence had been hiding. He had grown up on farms his whole life, but nothing prepared him for the silence of this one. Miles from the nearest town, his land stretched over hills and dry fields, with an old barn standing crookily against the sky. It had been his father's property once, but after decades of abandonment, the place felt more like a forgotten island than a farm. Still, he moved in anyway. He wanted a quiet life and a simple routine. Wake up before sunrise, feed the animals, work the fields, and fall asleep under the wide, empty sky. But the nights were never empty. The first sign came during his second week. He woke before dawn, stepped outside with a cup of coffee, and froze. One of his goats lay on the dirt, motionless. At first, he thought a wolf or a stray dog had gotten to it. But when he pulled his flashlight closer, he saw something that made his skin prickle. There were no bite marks, no torn flesh, no blood anywhere. The animal's neck looked twisted, as though something incredibly strong had snapped it with one silent, perfect motion. He buried the goat and told himself it had slipped, or its head had gotten stuck in the fence. It was easier to believe that than consider anything else, but the second night proved it. Wasn't an accident. At exactly 2:41 a.m., he woke to a sound echoing through the stillness, something between a moan and a low hiss. It drifted across the field like cold air. He grabbed his flashlight and shotgun, stepped onto the porch, and listened. The barn door was swinging open. He knew he had closed it. He walked slowly toward the barn, the beam of his flashlight shaking in his hand. The night felt wrong, too quiet, too heavy, as if the darkness itself was watching him. When he reached the barn, he took a breath and pushed the door open wider. Inside, he found another one of his goats collapsed on the ground, neck broken, eyes open. No struggle, no blood, just the same unnatural, violent twist. Something was killing them, but not eating them, just snapping their necks and leaving them behind. He barricaded the barn door and stayed awake till dawn, listening to every rustle of wind, every creak of wood. The next morning, he installed brighter lights around the property. He hung noisy metal cans and bells around the fences. He even placed strong wooden beams to reinforce the barn, but none of it mattered, because whatever was coming wasn't afraid. On the fourth night, he heard footsteps. Not animal footsteps. Heavy ones. Slow, deliberate. 2 legs. They circled the house first, dragging slightly in the dirt, like someone carrying weight behind them. He grabbed his shotgun, heart pounding so hard it hurt, and waited by the window. He saw nothing but the footsteps. Continued. Circling. Dragging. Stopping. Starting again. Then they moved toward the barn. He wanted to follow, but something in his body refused to move, as though instinct itself was screaming at him to stay inside. Then came the scream. A horrible sound, high-pitched, sudden, cut off halfway, as though something had died instantly. He slammed his eyes shut, gripping the shotgun tighter, breathing in sharp, painful bursts. By morning, he forced himself to go check. The sunlight didn't make him feel any safer. Inside the barn, he found his strongest ram lying in the corner. Its neck was snapped in the exact same way as the others. That's when he noticed something new. Deep scratch marks along the wooden floor. Long, curved, like someone had dragged a large claw or metal hook across the surface. It was the first physical sign that whatever visited his farm wasn't human. He called the nearest town authorities. They shrugged it off as wolves, even though wolves didn't walk on 2 legs or break necks without leaving a single tooth mark. So that night, he prepared for war. He stayed awake, lights on, shotgun ready, every muscle tense. 1 o'clock. Nothing. 2 a.m., only the wind moving through the grass. 2:41a.m. The exact time at first. Happened. The footsteps returned, this time closer. He felt them. Before he heard them, a faint vibration under his feet, as though something heavy was walking across the field. He pointed his shotgun toward the door, breath trembling. Something brushed against the side of the house. Slow. Scraping. Dragging. Something across the wall. He could hear its weight. Shifting. And something tapped the window. Lightly. Once. Twice. 3 times. He stepped back. The tapping stopped. Silence. Then a loud, sharp impact. Something hit the window hard enough to crack the glass. He stumbled backward, heart slamming in his chest. The house began to shake. Just slightly, like something was pushing against it. He didn't wait. He grabbed his keys, his flashlight, and ran out the back door without looking behind him. He jumped into his truck, turned the engine, and sped down the dirt road faster than he ever had in his life. He didn't stop driving until he reached the next town. He slept in his truck. He told himself he was done with that farm, with that land, with whatever walked there at night. When he returned at sunrise with 2 local men to help pack his things, they found one final sign. Near the barn, drawn in the dirt, were 3 long claw-like marks, each one deeper than a man's finger could ever carve. He didn't say a word. He left the farm that day. And whatever stalks that lonely land at night still walks there, dragging its weight through the darkness, searching for new sounds, new animals, new life to snap quietly under the cover of silence. He tried to forget the farm. He really did. For weeks after he left, he stayed in a small rented room behind a gas station, sleeping with the lights on and the shotgun beside his bed. But the human mind isn't built to leave unanswered questions behind. And the farm, the silence, the killings, the claw marks stayed inside, his head like a splinter he could never remove. Every night he dreamed of footsteps in the dirt. Every morning he woke sweating, convinced something had followed him. It wasn't until the third week that he got the call that an old farmer from a neighboring property had driven past his abandoned land. He said the lights in the barn were flickering on and off. The problem was simple. There was no electricity in that barn. Not for years. He hung up immediately. His blood turned to ice. Something was inside the barn. Something smart enough to turn lights on and off. Lights that shouldn't even work. For the rest of that day, he sat on his motel bed staring at the wall. He knew he had two choices: ignore the call and run from the farm for the rest of his life, or go back and see for himself. Curiosity won, or maybe madness. At sunset, he drove back, slowly, carefully, the road growing darker as the sky turned orange, then bruised purple. By the time he reached the long dirt path leading to the farm, night had settled over the land like a heavy blanket. He cut the engine and listened. Silence. Too much silence. He stepped out of the truck with a flashlight in hand. The barn sat at the end of the field, a crooked shadow against the horizon. Every instinct in his body begged him to get back in the truck. He didn't single quotes D. Now he moved across the field, boots sinking slightly into the cold dirt. With every step, the farm felt less like a place and more like a mouth waiting to swallow him. The barn door was closed, but there was light. Inside, a warm, flickering glow coming from the cracks. He held his breath and slowly pushed the door open. The entire barn was empty. No animals. No tools. No equipment. Just a single lantern hanging from a beam in the center, swinging slightly as if someone had touched it. Seconds before he arrived, he scanned the ground. More claw marks, fresh ones, and something else. Footprints. Human. Bare. Leading deeper into the barn, toward the back wall. His pulse quickened. He followed them cautiously, shotgun raised, each step echoing in the hollow air. When he reached the back wall, his beam landed on something that made him stop breathing. A hole, a large one, freshly carved through the wooden boards, leading under the barn's foundation, straight into darkness. The footprints ended at the hole. He knelt down and pointed the flashlight into the opening. The light revealed a tunnel, narrow, jagged, dug by something with enormous strength. The dirt walls were clawed, scraped, and smeared with something dark. Then he saw it. A hand, human-like, but too long, with fingers stretched unnaturally. The nails curved and sharp, like blackened blades. It was resting quietly on the ground, partly hidden in the shadow, as if whatever it belonged to was waiting. Then it moved, a slow curl of its fingers. He stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. The lantern flickered. The barn seemed to breathe around him. He scrambled to his feet, turned, and ran for the door. Halfway there, he heard it. Something pulling itself out of the tunnel. A scraping sound, a dragging sound, and something else. Breathing. Deep, heavy, wet. The same sound he had heard outside his window the night he fled. He sprinted across the field, nearly tripping in the dark, not daring to look behind him. The breathing got louder. The ground seemed to shake under its weight. He reached the truck, yanked the door open, and threw himself inside. As he tried to start the engine, he saw in the side mirror a shape emerging from the barn. Tall. Bent. Too thin, arms dragging on the ground. Head tilted like something studying him with hungry curiosity. Its eyes reflected the moonlight, pale, glowing. Animal. Like. The engine started. He slammed the gas. The creature stepped forward. Fast, too fast, almost reaching the truck, before the wheels tore across the dirt road and carried him away He didn't stop driving until he reached another town. Entirely, 50 miles away. He never went back. The farm is still there. The barn is still there. And the tunnel still waits beneath it. Some nights, the neighboring farmers swear they hear something moving in the fields. Heavy footsteps, low, dragging, and breathing, like something searching for the man who escaped. He wasn't always a man who lived alone. Before the divorce, before the silence of his empty house became his only companion, he was a respected doctor with a warm home, a family, and a life that made sense. But after the separation, he found himself moving into a modest 2-story house on the outskirts of the city, not exactly isolated, but far enough from the busy streets that nights felt unsettlingly quiet. He told himself it was temporary, just until he healed, just until things settled. He worked long shifts at the hospital, sometimes 14 hours at a time. Coming home to an empty house felt strange, but he tried to get used to it. He cooked simple meals, kept everything clean, and tried not to think about what his life had become. It was late on a Thursday night when everything began. He had just come home from a long emergency shift. It was nearly 1 a.m. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the air felt thick, like a storm was waiting to break. He dropped his keys on the small table near the door, hung his white coat, and exhaled. The house was silent, too silent. He went upstairs, showered quickly, and changed into comfortable clothes before heading to the living room. He sat on the couch, scrolling through messages he didn't want to answer, emails he didn't want to read, and then he heard it, a faint sound, just outside the living room window. Not a car, not a person walking by, not the wind, something metallic, like tools. He froze. He listened again, heart slowly rising in his chest like a trapped fist trying to escape. And another sound, a whisper, low, sharp. Not words, more like a signal. One person communicating with another. He stood up slowly and turned off the lamp, leaving the house in semi-darkness. He crept to the window and peeked through the side of the curtain. 2 men were standing near the back gate. Both dressed in dark clothing, both wearing gloves, one holding a crowbar, other carrying a black duffel bag. His stomach dropped. Burglars. And they weren't there by accident. He stepped back from the window, careful not to make a sound. His mind raced. He had treated knife wounds, gunshot injuries, trauma. But this time, the danger wasn't the patient's. It was his. He moved toward the kitchen where his phone was charging. As he reached the doorway, another sound shattered the silence. A loud metallic crack. The back door. They were breaking in. He grabbed the phone, but before he could dial, the power went out. The house fell into total darkness. He felt his throat tighten. They had cut the electricity. This was planned. He backed into the living room and crouched behind the couch. His breathing grew shallow. He pressed his phone to his chest, trying to stop his hand from shaking. First intruder stepped inside. He heard the heavy boots on the wooden floor. Slow, careful, calculated. Another pair of steps followed a moment later. 2 men inside the house. He heard one of them whisper, "Check upstairs." He might be asleep. He felt a cold wave wash over him. They weren't just there to steal. Their voices were wrong, too calm, too sure. Footsteps moved toward the staircase. He stayed low, trying to think. He didn't have weapons. He didn't own a gun. He kept his life clean, simple. He grabbed the only thing he could find, a heavy glass trophy from a medical award. It felt ridiculous in his hands, but it was all he had. The second intruder stayed downstairs. His boots moved closer, scanning the living room, knocking on walls, checking drawers. The doctor pressed his back against the couch, gripping the trophy so tightly his knuckles ached out. Then he heard the voice of the man upstairs. "Empty. He ain't up here." The man downstairs answered, "He's here somewhere. The intel said he keeps cash in the house. Find him." Cash Dot, of course. He had withdrawn a large sum 2 days earlier for a property deal. Only 2 people knew. One of them was a hospital colleague. His breath caught. This was no random robbery. Suddenly, the man downstairs stepped around this couch. Their eyes met. The intruder lunged instantly. The doctor swung the trophy with pure desperation, smashing it into the man's face. The intruder staggered backward, cursing, blood streaming from his nose. The doctor didn't wait. He sprinted toward the front door, but before he reached it, the second man thundered down the stairs, blocking his escape. Bigger, stronger, faster. The doctor darted into the narrow hallway, the only path left, but the second man grabbed him by the shirt and slammed him against the wall. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. A punch followed, brutal and fast. "You should have stayed upstairs." "Doc," the man growled. The doctor struggled, kicking wildly. But another punch dropped him to the floor. He crawled backward, dizzy, his vision blurring. The smaller intruder, the one with the injured nose, staggered toward them, furious. "Where's the money?" The doctor didn't answer. Couldn't. The bigger intruder raised a knife. "We don't need him alive." Panic surged through him like electricity. He kicked the man's shin as hard as he could, buying a second, just 1 second, and scrambled toward the kitchen. He wasn't thinking anymore, just surviving. He grabbed the nearest drawer, yanked it open, and his fingers touched something cold and metallic. Scalpel dot small, sharp, familiar. He spun around just as the large intruder reached him again. With a desperate slash, he cut across the man's forearm. The intruder screamed and dropped the knife. The doctor ran again, toward the laundry room, toward the back exit. He heard footsteps behind him. 2 sets, fast, angry, wild. He threw himself at the back door, unlocking it with shaking hands. The door burst open. He ran outside into the darkness of his yard, but the smaller intruder tackled him from behind. They tumbled to the ground. Dirt filled the doctor's mouth. Hands clawed at him, trying to pin him down. He fought wildly, kicking, grabbing anything he could. His hand landed on a rock, solid, heavy, jagged. He swung it dot once, dot twice, dot a third time. The intruder collapsed, motionless. The doctor stumbled to his feet, chest burning, head spinning. He looked around frantically. The second intruder was limping toward him from the house, holding his bleeding arm, rage twisting his face. Doctor ran toward the street. The man chased him, but the sound of sirens suddenly pierced the night. Neighbors had heard the struggle. Blue and red lights flooded the street as police cars arrived. The second intruder tried to flee, but was quickly caught. The first intruder, the one in the yard, was still breathing but unconscious. The doctor collapsed to his knees, shaking violently, barely able to speak. The nightmare was over dot at the hospital. Officers questioned him. The truth came out slowly. Someone he trusted had tipped the robbers off, telling them he kept large sums of money at home. His colleague was arrested days later. For months afterward, the doctor couldn't sleep without checking every door, every window, every shadow. The house never felt the same again. It never felt safe, but he survived. He rebuilt his life. And sometimes, when he lies awake in the quiet darkness, he realizes that living alone isn't scary. What's scary is discovering who's willing to hurt you, and who knew exactly where to find you. He had been running the same small convenience store for almost 15 years. It sat on the corner of a quiet street in a small town in Northern California, a town where nothing truly dangerous ever seemed to happen. People left their doors unlocked. Kids played outside until midnight in the summer. Everyone knew everyone. Everything changed in 1 week. It started with the bakery across the street. The owner arrived one morning to find the front window shattered, cash register emptied, and every camera destroyed. People said it was teenagers, maybe drug addicts. But the next night, the hardware store down the block was hit. The night after that, the liquor store. Then a pawn shop. Then a pharmacy. Every store. One by one. Same method. Cameras smashed. Power cut. No. Fingerprints. Everything valuable gone. The sheriff's department told the town one chilling sentence. This isn't random. This is a professional crew. The merchant store, a small corner shop selling food, tools, drinks, and basic supplies, was one of the last untouched. And he knew it was only a matter of time before they came for him. So he decided to sleep inside the store. Not because he was brave, but because he had no choice. His entire life savings were tied up in that shop. Losing it would destroy him. He brought a sleeping bag, a tiny pillow, and an old baseball bat he kept for emergencies. He installed temporary lights, moved a shelf to block the back door, and placed bells on the front entrance. He thought he was prepared. He wasn't. On the fifth night, the storm came. A heavy, violent California storm, rare but unforgiving. Rain slammed against the windows. Wind howled down the street, and thunder shook the roof every few minutes. He sat behind the counter drinking cheap coffee, trying to stay awake. The lights flickered with every thunder strike. Outside, the street was completely dead, swallowed by rain and darkness. Around 2:14 a.m., as he began to drift into a half-sleep, the lights went out. All of them. The entire block went black. His heart tightened. The timing was too perfect, too precise. He grabbed his flashlight from under the counter and turned it on, its thin beam slicing through the darkness. He listened, every muscle in his body tensed. At first, all he heard was rain. Then, a sound that didn't belong, metallic clicking, coming from the back door. He froze. Someone was gently testing the lock. He crawled behind the shelves, hiding, holding the baseball bat so tightly his knuckles turned white. He turned off the flashlight and waited. The metallic sound stopped. Then he heard a low whisper. Not English, not loud enough to understand. Just two voices communicating in short, sharp breaths. Then came the sound that made his stomach twist. A drill, silent, high-powered, the kind professionals, used to remove locks without breaking anything. They were trying to break in through the back door. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to think. His phone was on the counter, too far. If he stood up, they'd hear him. If he ran, they'd see him through the front window. The drilling stopped. Silence. But not normal silence. The heavy, suffocating kind that tells you someone is listening for you. He slid farther behind the shelf, praying his heartbeat wasn't loud enough to give him away. Then a loud, sharp clank. The back door popped open. Footsteps entered. Slow, confident. There were at least 3 of them. He could hear their boots on the tile floor. One had a heavy walk. Another was light, quick. The third kept whispering directions. They knew the layout. They knew exactly what they were looking for. He heard one of them smash the fuse box with a crowbar to prevent the lights from ever coming back on. Another moved down the aisle, checking each shelf for valuables. Then the third spoke. Check the office. He sleeps here. The merchant felt his blood turn to ice. They knew he was inside. They weren't just stealing. They were hunting him. He crawled as quietly as he could toward the storage room door, hoping to slip inside and lock it. As he reached the corner, his knee bumped a bottle. It rolled across the floor. The sound echoed like an explosion in the darkness. Everything went silent. Then, one of the intruders shouted, "He's here!" "Spread out!" Boots thundered across the floor. He ran. He tore into the storage room and slammed the door. The lock clicked just as someone grabbed the handle from the outside and tried to open it. Started hitting the door. Again. Each blow stronger than the last. The old wooden door shook violently. He backed away and frantically looked around. The storage room was tiny. Only boxes, shelves, and an old desk. No exit. No window. He was trapped. The door cracked. Wood splintered. One more hit and it would break. He grabbed the only thing he could use as a weapon. Metal broom handle. The door burst open. Masked man stepped inside, holding a crowbar, breathing hard. The merchant swung the metal broom with every ounce of strength he had. It hit the intruder's arm, making him drop the crowbar with a painful grunt. The merchant lunged for the crowbar, but another intruder grabbed him from behind. They wrestled brutally, crashing into shelves, knocking boxes everywhere. The merchant elbowed him in the ribs, twisted free, and struck him in the side of the head with the crowbar. The intruder fell, but the first one was already on his feet. Again, just kill him. The man shouted. The merchant raised the crowbar to strike. Then red and blue lights exploded through the front windows. Sirens. A neighbor had seen the power outage and then suspicious figures and finally called the police. Panic erupted among the intruders. One ran, another limped. The third tried to escape through the back, but was tackled by officers outside. The merchant collapsed to the floor, shaking, breaths shallow, unable to stand. An officer rushed in and helped him out as more police swarmed the store. 2 intruders were caught. One escaped, the leader. The police later revealed that the gang had hit 4 towns across the state. Highly organized, mobile, professional, and they knew the merchant wasn't supposed to be there that night. A lucky twist of fate saved his life. For weeks he lived with nightmares. Every sound made him jump. Every night felt unsafe. But he survived, and his story spread across the state as a warning. Some criminals don't come to steal. They come to silence witnesses, remove obstacles, erase anyone who stands in their path, and sometimes the only thing standing between life and death is the sound of sirens arriving 1 minute earlier than expected.